The presentation, I'm just going to give a little backstory on this. A friend of mine contacted me during the COVID, when COVID had that surge that kind of started around that Thanksgiving time frame. There was a need to start doing a better job at tracking um, how many beds were available for healthcare in healthcare facilities like nursing homes, so that hospitals could be notified um, how many beds were available at different areas to transport because we were running out of hospital beds. And so this guy reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, is there a way we could, build something to quickly track this?" Um, and React came to my mind because we had been doing Angular apps with .NET Core, and I had played around with React a little bit, and it seemed like it was a quicker way to get a spa delivered out the door, something that looked decent enough to be a temporary application. So built the application for them to track beds available really quick with React and .NET Web API with .NET Core. I think all in all, I had less than 25, maybe 20 hours of development into that. Of course, there's a lot of configuration with servers and SSL certificates and domain names and that kind of thing to get it out the door, production ready. But I think I had kind of production grade app that could last a few months at least out the door with 20 hours of effort. Then, of course, came back and said, "Hey, we need to track vaccines." So then I was like, "Oh, if I knew you were going to keep asking for apps, I probably would have done this a little different." But essentially, same concept, right? Except for this time, I tried to separate the SPA React app from the .NET Core Web API because the wheels are starting to turn. I'm like, well, this is for Iowa. Nebraska's going to want it. South Dakota's going to want it. Minnesota's going to want it. There's going to be potentially multiple states that are going to want this. And so it might make sense to separate this out. That's when I decided to challenge myself a little more, and I'm going to show you some stuff here soon. I decided to make it a little more challenging and build the SPA app with Visual Studio Code on a Mac and build the .NET Core Web API layer with Visual Studio on a Windows machine. And then I ran into some more issues with things like CORS, cross-origin requests, and ultimately the deployment of the thing and get it orchestrated on the server so that it works and can communicate to from the SPA to the API layer and then the API layer to the database. So this is really an open session just for me to walk you through some of the things that I have done along the way. So if you're not familiar with React, it's not like a crash course. It's not a deep dive in React. There is a .NET starter template for a React project. I'm gonna start sharing here. Okay, so this is Visual Studio Code running on Mac OS, and here I've already created a React SPA front end. And if you, I'm going to pull up another command line. If you're familiar with the .NET command line, just create a new directory, call it test.NET React. So if you just type .NET New, you'll see a list of project types that you can create. One of them is React. So if you just go .NET New React, that's going to create all the structure in the shell for a React SPA app with the .NET Core Web API backend. And I have .NET 3.1 here installed. I'm not on 5. So you can see it's very successfully. Let's go into that. So inside kind of the core structure here, it creates this folder called client app. And inside the client app is where your React stuff is. Outside of that client app is all .NET Web API. So it's .NET, it's stuff that you're familiar with, right? And now I'm going to show another screen of a project that was created this way that's already up and running.
Hey Matt, you got a request in the comments to, if possible, can you increase the size of the font?
Sure. What are
No, sure.
double? How's that? Is that good enough?
I think the size of the font is the struggle. It's really hard. It's really small.
It's 6:15.
Yes, it is. There you go. That's a little better. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So now I'm sharing a different screen. Give me a second. Feel free to ask questions during the silence.
So Matt, do you know what the difference is between the .NET New React app and the React Create React app?
Yeah, so the React Create, it would be NPM React.
Yeah.
That will just create the React structure, the standard React SPA application, or you'll get my app or whatever you call it. And that's just the SPA, it's just React with the packages needed to build that and run that. But if you do it with .NET, it creates a web API template project along with, here's an example. So in Visual Studio, if you do the same thing, you're going to get this this layout. So you'll have, in addition to everything that you might see in a normal web API project with your controllers, you're also going to get this client app folder. And inside that client app folder is everything to do with React. That's your React application. And then .NET handles all of the details with the pipeline and the startup of building the React app when you build your .NET project. So if I go to right click on the project and do a build, it's going to also it's not just building the .NET web API, it's also building the React application. And then when you run it, it will run, it'll start up the React app. It goes to the index.html and to the default root HTML directory.
Okay.
And then it exposes, wait for this to launch here.
Do you know if it's using the React? If the .NET new version is using the React version behind the scenes? I mean, is it going to produce the same React application? Either way.
Oh no, it's a little bit different. The .NET one adds some things. It adds Bootstrap. It adds the design and the style sheet and some styles to it.
Okay. All right.
Which gives you it gives you like a default Bootstrap template for styling out of the box. If you just do it in React, you won't get that. You'll have to start from scratch and create that on your own. And then the other thing is when you do the vanilla. So let's just do that. Go to new project. You go to ASP.NET Core. Not sure what the difference between these two is. They look the same to me. But when you go with that default out-of-the-box template, .NET Core 3.1, we want to do API, HTTPS, great. So there's what you get, vanilla, out of it.
Yep.
So now I don't see the something must have changed because it does not show in the it's not showing in React.
When you were creating it, you needed to click React. You just click Web API.
Thank you. There, React.js. Now we see you have the client app folder. And it builds a default controller to kind of show you how it works. And it wires it up so that when you run it, it also adds the Bootstrap, the style sheets, and wires it up. Let's run it here. While we're waiting for that, so what I did was, here we go. So there you go. Out of the box, you get some design, you get some examples of controllers, you get example of the React, how to maintain state in React with this counter. They then have this weather forecast stuff that gives you an example of how to pull data. It doesn't go into any depth on SQL databases or things like that, or submitting form data, complex data, but it's enough to get you started and to get something built pretty quick. So what I did was I separated this client app, the React piece. I tried to pull it out. Initially, I tried to pull that out of the project, right? That didn't go well. This was, the way this was set up, I would have been better off just starting over, right? So that's when I went to the Mac and just created the standard React app, and then added the Bootstrap packages for the design, and then started creating just a simple JavaScript, TypeScript framework layout application, and that's what I was showing with this other screen here. So this I did in Visual Studio Code. And then we can put, wrong direction. Do an npm run build.
I think I'm not seeing the screen anymore.
Oh, sorry. Share. How's that? Is it showing now?
Nope, still not shown.
No.
There we go.
So what I did there was an npm run build that just double check that everything builds. You don't necessarily need to do that for React because it's static. And npm start will launch that site on a development web server locally. Sorry, I can't just share my whole screen because I've got one of those wide monitors. So it causes problems when I try to share everything, but I will keep flipping back and forth for you. Wait, this might work. Okay, so when I did the npm start, this launched. So this is my proof of concept, right? So basically it's just 2 pages. We wanted providers to come in and type in their unique information and be able to find their data. And then it would show which week they're reporting for, fill in the numbers, submit it, really simple, really easy. And then for providers to also be able to log in and look at the stats. Again, put in their provider number and be able to show the statistics for aggregated up by counties. So the reason why this isn't working right now is because the API behind it, which you see here, it's calling, is not running. So if I go to the other machine and open that project, nope, wrong one. The API, and run this. And I will put a breakpoint in here. So there's two methods. One's to update the data and one's to get the data. I'm going to put a breakpoint in the update data. Put in my provider number, my zip code, and click find. And you see I got my data. It did not hit the breakpoint though, concerning. Let's see why. Oh, I haven't updated the data. I retrieved the data. Right? So go back. So I want to increase my patients for, what's the week, February 22. Let's put in 8 patients, 7 staff, 5 other. This is one of the things, by the way, did you see this total adding up? This is one of the things that React just really kicks ass at. It's just really good at stuff that normally would take developers a lot of work to do. And that's one of the reasons why I like it. So I'm going to submit that. And I should hit my breakpoint. Yep, my breakpoint's been hit. I can see I'm passing in the provider ID, zip code. I just hard-coded the weeks. I could have got more creative with that, but lack of time. And then we have integers for number of patients, number of staff, and other. And then we are doing a validation check on the provider and zip code to make sure that's a valid provider and zip code before we do an insert into the database or an update. Speaking of inserts and updates, step into this. Yeah. Okay. Data gets returned, screen's done. Now, this particular provider number is in Wenatchee County. So I updated these numbers. So if I go into vaccine stats, I should see that number increased. And there it is. Another thing that I felt was pretty easy to do in React that used to take a lot of time is the sorting and the grid for that matter. Okay, so let's go.
What grid are you using there? Is it just a? I guess yeah. What is it?
So actually, it's not even a grid. It's just it's a bulleted list. It's a
Okay.
item. Yeah.
So I was thinking maybe it was. So you just reorder the list that sits in the state. Is that
Yeah.
the idea? And then it rebinds to it.
What I did was, for sake of time, I actually went back to the database. I probably could have done what you said, Matt.
Okay.
But this actually, look at that real quick. So when you yeah, there's a sort order on the Git for the database. So it is going back to the database. It's changing the sort order. So we're using Entity Framework. Using what I did to get this created faster was create a database first. So in the database, created the simple tables for the provider and the vaccine stats. And then once you create your database from Visual Studio, if we shut this down, if you go to the NuGet Package Manager console, you can use the DB scaffolding command to, I'll show you that. Whoops, that just executed it. Good thing that wasn't a valid database connection. Try that again.
Hey Matt, quick question. When you're doing the sorting, is there a reason or you can use custom hooks for this feature in React?
Yeah, you could use custom hooks for that. This was rapid prototype to get this done to show them what we could do. But yeah, you're right. That would have worked.
Okay, thanks.
And the reason why, now if you can do that in hooks, that works. The reason why I sent it back to the database though is that I assumed there would be high volume and that the data would be getting updated to the point where even when you sorted, there may be a disconnect between what data you already have on your screen
It
versus
should get the latest data, basically.
yeah.
Thanks.
This, by the way, this never made it to production. The numbers, the COVID numbers started to come down before this was ready, and they decided to pull the plug on this particular app. So as you can, if you build your database first, you can use the DB scaffolding to create your model from the database, and you could also work this into your to your pipeline and your delivery pipeline if you wanted to. I guess there are differing approaches to database updates after an application is built once you've gone to production, whether you're code first or or database first, but this is more of a database first approach, at least initially out the gate. And then going forward, after you create your initial database, you could switch to a code first model for your deployments. But I'm gonna do a little test here. So when I did that scaffolding originally, I pointed it to that vaccine table, and this is what you get for output. Sorry, vaccine. It is. Okay. So yeah, when I did that, it created, based on that table, the scaffolding creates this model. And it's very verbose, and it is hard to change manually, and I don't recommend doing that. If any of you have worked with this, you understand that it's not a good approach. But that gets you your database context, and that gets you connected to, ultimately, to your database from your Entity Framework queries. And then after I did that, in order to kind of rapidly develop the controller, you can then use the scaffolding to stub in your controller methods, at least do your CRUD operations. So if you go to, well, right click on controllers, add new scaffolded item, you can create your CRUD from your model. Now I already created this, so I don't want to do it again. But what happened when I did that, and well, we can do it again. Let's do, let's call it 2. So by default, that's going to create the routes with the standard HTTP verbs for get, post, put, delete. So you have the get. So the initial get just gets all records from that table. The get with the ID gets a specific record from that table. The put with the ID takes in that entire object and updates it. Actually, put would insert, right? Post does the update, and then delete does the delete. So these are the standard verbs that you get with the scaffolding. However, in most cases, that isn't always what you're looking for. So basically, all I needed was get the stats, get the specific stats for the provider, get the global stats for everything, and update the stats for the provider. So you can create your own verbs, or not verbs, but you can create your own routes with the method names, and then do the REST calls directly to those routes, which is what I did ultimately. And then you can pass objects in. Some of you are familiar with this, some of you may not be. You can pass in complex objects, or you can just do simple types in the method call. It works both ways. .NET figures it out for you, which is very nice. But it can also be very time-consuming trying to troubleshoot when this is not matched up correctly, and when your parameters that you're passing in don't match the parameters that the method takes. So, for example, in this scenario, if you don't pass in string int, it's very hard to troubleshoot that. And then on the flip side, if you passed in a complex object to this, it's even harder to troubleshoot, because if the parameters of the object don't match, then it will not work, and it will not tell you why it's not working. So that can be fun. What else do we want to show?
Hey, Matt, I think it's something not necessarily exactly related to what you're talking about, but it's also important to note that inside the scaffolded controller, that they use the context, and I assume that context gets passed into the constructor, right?
Yes.
So that I think it's important to note that there's no using statements around that, and that's not a bug. I think we were all taught early on to always dispose of our objects, but that sort of changes with when you start using a dependency injection container to get instances of those objects, because now the lifetime management of that object is managed by that DI container. And so I see a lot of developers try to dispose of those things, then run into issues later on saying, well, they'll get an error saying, well, they're trying to use a disposed object, because the DI container will give you the same object back, right? And can cause some issues. So go against your instinct. Don't dispose.
Yeah, that's another thing I love about the .NET Core. I mean, yeah, it's doing the DI for you. Does a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yep. Rule of thumb is if you create it, destroy it. If you didn't create it, don't destroy it.
Right.
Another issue I ran into here was the cores I mentioned earlier. When you're working with an application like the one I showed you earlier, was it Web Application 5? The SPA app, right, and the .NET Core API are hosted in the same space. So you don't have a cross-origin request because the client app's in here, right? But when you separate those out, now you have the cross-origin request. And by default, .NET's not going to allow that, which is another thing that it does for us, which is awesome. But it can also cause some painful debugging that takes a while to figure out. But a quick Google search in how to enable cores in .NET, how to enable cores in .NET Web API will get you this here. Adding the cores to the startup, and then adding the origins. So not very complicated. Took a little bit of troubleshooting. And then the next step are to get this deployed to Azure. Well, thankfully, .NET makes that, or Visual Studio, along with Azure, makes that pretty easy for us. So as long as you're in a Git repo, which I was, and you're publishing to your Azure DevOps or whatever. I mean, if you want to deploy to Azure, it's definitely easier with Azure DevOps until GitHub gets more mature. But I'm going to pull up my Azure DevOps repo here. Maybe. Okay, so this is the React app. Just created a repo in Azure DevOps. Pushed to that repo, and then created a release pipeline to build that React application and get the artifacts ready to publish to an Azure resource. Ideally, because it's a React SPA app, I can just publish it to the Azure static website hosting, which is essentially free. Unfortunately, this is where I was at. This is as far as I got. Unfortunately, there was no automated release pipeline, at least no out-of-the-box release pipeline to deliver the React app to the Azure static website hosting. I could deploy it to an app service plan out of the box here. However, that's going to cost you more money than just deploying it to a static site, static hosting, because the app service plan has CPU and memory behind it, and it's running and ready to serve that app. But the API application I could deploy to an app service plan. So I created a repo for that as well. So every time I check in, it automatically does a build. And you can see here, so this is that web API project that we were looking at. Every time I do a commit to push to master, it executes the release pipeline here, which does the build. We can see that was successful. And then the successful build triggers the release to an app service plan. And you can click on this to see that. And then when I go into, so let's go back to releases. I didn't. So this release deploys to this Azure App Service. So I should be able to go out to my Azure subscription and see that. Here it is. So it's an app service plan with an app service on it. So if I open that, it should get a URL to it. What happened to the URL?
Looks like you're missing a column on the right there.
Does look like I'm missing something.
I wonder if it's because of your screen size, maybe you're just in a mode where it's turned off that column.
There you
There it is.
It still doesn't give the URL though.
Yeah, that's the app service plan there.
Oh, yeah. Would be
Yeah, is it just not showing? Is that why?
maybe. It won't be on the app service plan. It should be on the app service. Which,
So now close the left column.
Oh,
there
there
you
we
go. Yeah.
go. Thought they changed it on me. Okay, so problem is, so this should work, but I don't have the database wired up yet. Well, okay, I don't want to waste time playing with this now. This is where I was at before before the meetup. So the next steps were to get the app service plan deployed to the app service like I'm showing you, and that can be done real easily through the release pipelines through Azure DevOps. Then get the React SPA app also deployed, but not to an app service plan, to a static website storage account, which what I was saying here is there is no template for that in the in Azure DevOps. So unless I'm missing something, this is going to have to be a manual thing.
But anyways, you can use the same app service plan to both of these apps, right? And
You
you
could,
are,
yeah, you could, and that's another option. Alternately, you can also just rip your, your web API could also be ripped out into Azure Functions for that matter. But that was outside the scope of this. So, and then database, deploying database is a little trickier with current state of things. So, and I just upgraded to the latest SQL Server Management Studio to see if they have support for Azure fully integrated yet, and they have a few new features. If you right-click on your database, they now have this Azure Data Studio, and they also have the ability to connect to an Azure storage account or the Azure SIS, but they still don't have an automated or intuitive way to migrate a database from one server, from your on-prem server, your local host, or wherever you're at, right, to Azure. As far as I can tell. If anybody's
Yeah,
done,
I have that same question. I posted it in the chat here.
wait a minute, what's this?
There you go.
Let's try it.
Is there I'm curious what everyone uses for their database deployment. I know that I've done a bit of work with Indy framework migrations, but
So,
I don't feel like
yeah,
that's necessarily the best approach either.
I don't like that approach. What we've been doing is just ad hoc. For changes, we're just doing ad hoc SQL queries that we do through release pipelines.
Yeah.
And then for the database project. What do they call that? I don't know what we call it. The
DAC
DACPAC. We've been doing DACPAC.
Okay.
I can't say that I like that, but I feel like it should be easier. What are other people doing on that?
Ryan in the chat said that he uses SSDT. Trying to think what that is. I'm sure. Ryan, if you're willing to speak up. I don't know what the acronym is. SQL Server something.
I think that's the same as the DAC pack.
Data transformation.
Okay.
SQL Server data tools. So you have a Visual Studio project with it, with the database all in it, and you make your changes to the schema and whatnot, and then it has a publish feature.
Yep.
That pushes it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen people use DBUp is another alternative. You basically write your own SQL queries there, and it keeps track of which ones have been deployed to the SQL Server, and then just runs them in order. It's kind of a less fancy approach, but it works.
This is promising. I'm going to try this one more time. This is the first time I've seen this in SQL Management Studio, so maybe there's some kinks still that need to be worked out, but it's definitely promising, and maybe I need a restart. But no, that's not going to work.
Yeah, I think the trick is that whatever you come up with, ideally, it should be managed by the build pipeline, right? And in your CI. So at some point inside your CI, you need to be building some kind of, maybe it's in your release too. Either way, it happens at that point, and tooling seems pretty scarce.
Yeah, and I can see here it's creating a temporary backpack.
Okay.
And then, so this would just be an initial one-time get that created, and then after that, you could either do the ad hoc or do the migrations. So have you had luck with doing migrations, Matt?
Yeah, we don't use the migrations directly against the database. We generate a script during the build portion, and we use the idempotent capability that's in Entity Framework. So it generates a script that can work with any version of your database, and then it applies it appropriately. And then we just make that an artifact of the build, and then use it during the release to deploy to whatever database that we're going to. Seems to work out all right. I like Entity Framework migrations. They're not perfect by any stretch, but they give you the ability to customize what you're doing a little bit more than some other methods. So if you have some special needs for whatever you're doing, they offer that. And then in addition, if you have a DBA who's particular about their database, they can review those scripts before they get run against the system.
Yeah, say that again, the DBA. What
So-
does the DBA do?
So because we're generating a script that we're packaging as part of the build, that script can be reviewed by a DBA before it gets deployed to the production database.
Okay.
So if you're in an environment where you need those things to be reviewed, that might be a good approach.
Yeah, and you could have the check, the gate, approval gate, and
Yep.
just put it in the pipeline.
Exactly. Yep.
I kind of like that. That works. So anyway, yeah, that's new. I didn't know that existed. And then, of course, after that, next steps then are authentication. Always, as you notice, this app, it was hard to do authentication because we weren't going to have to require everybody to get a login and create a new account. So we tried to use more like you know, kind of what the government does to validate people, get three or four pieces of identifying information that we can use to prove your identity and use that as your authentication mechanism. So that was the approach there. And that's kind of it. That's kind of that's the journey. That's what I wanted to show you guys tonight. Any other questions or comments or additions?
Did you see the question about React versus Razor pages and core?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for reminding us about that. I saw that and forgot about it.
I still like Razor for quick stuff too, for proofs of concepts, for stuff like this. I probably could have done it in Razor, especially stuff that needs to be done fast and is not going to be long lived. But the issues that I have ran into with Razor over the years, well, I shouldn't say years because it hasn't been around that long, but it's as the system grows, it becomes overly complex. It becomes very complex, and it slows down your time from server to client, and it starts to kill the user experience unless you start to do some wizardry with jQuery, and that becomes more trouble than it's worth because you can do that same stuff with React or Angular or a SPA framework. I guess that's what I've found, and you guys, other people may have an opinion on that.
I think I share that same opinion. Don't use jQuery, by the way. Unless you have to. I guess it's good for small stuff.
Yeah, I guess that's where you get to. You get to that point where it's like, wait a minute, I want to do this and I want to do that, and then it gets too big.
Blazor, yes.
Blazor, yeah. I haven't ventured into Blazor yet.
Yeah, we need to have a good presentation on Blazor. I haven't dug into it much. I know Brian has been chomping at the bit to do a presentation for the user group on that topic. So once we get the opportunity to get Brian in front of the crowd here, we'll get that.
I'm saving my free time for the language behind the Roblox game. What's that called? The
Lua?
Lua. Yeah.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Do you have
Well,
small
how old are your
children
kids,
at home?
Matt? Yeah, I think they should know about it.
If you have kids between the age of 5 and 17,
Yep.
they probably play Roblox.
Oh, man. My kids are too sheltered, I guess.
Unless you're... So your kids don't have iPhones?
No.
Okay. It's the new hot game for that age group. it's not. It's actually not a game. It's a framework for building games and a programming language and a whole ecosystem around it. And so when you install Roblox on your phone or iPad or whatever, you get all of the games that are written in that language that support that ecosystem. And there are a plethora of ways for them to make money by in-app purchases. And my kids spend all of their allowance and birthday and Christmas money, not all of it, but a good chunk of it, buying in-app purchases on this game. And the stock goes public March 10th.
Next GameStop.
It's kind of like the folks who used to like to make Minecraft things moved over to Roblox.
You said it's Lua based?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very much like Minecraft with a more cult following, I think.
Yeah, even my wife has gotten into the paintball, so I hope she hasn't like destroyed any of your kids while they were out there, or maybe they got her.
But it's not .NET, so.
Well, that's all right. You can do other things. It's okay. Any other questions for Matt? Okay. Well, I appreciate your time, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So good luck on the drawing. Whoever wins, make sure you get your gifts. I appreciate you guys' time tonight, and it was good talking to you. It's a good conversation.